All right, welcome to the Left Wing. I'm John Cooper from Counterpoint Politics. I'm joined by Desmond Price from Independent Thought, joined by Chuck Cora from App Podlatia, as well as Sock from Twitch Streaming. We will be talking again this week about the debt ceiling. We talked a little bit about it last week and wanted to cover it again because it's an ongoing current event issue. One of, honestly, in terms of stakes, the largest piece of news in the country right now, whether or not it's talked about like that. And I wanted to get a little bit more into the details of what is actually being discussed here. What does McCarthy want to push through as part of his negotiation? A little less about, should we have the debt ceiling to begin with, which I think we can all agree probably maybe not the best way to do it. But anyway, wanted to cover a couple of the things that McCarthy wants. And McCarthy's big thing is to cut down on discretionary spending, and discretionary spending across the board. We're talking about things like education, the military, welfare, all of those things that are appropriated by Congress on a yearly basis. The big primary focus that McCarthy has right now is big cuts on Medicaid, Medicare, SNAP, and TANF. And he wants to effectively put a lot of working restrictions on them, work requirements in order to access SNAP benefits, that sort of thing. This has very much been a red versus blue issue. Wanted to ask you guys what you thought about means testing for welfare in general, work requirements for SNAP, and if whether you or not you agree with this sort of thing, or we should look to, if we want to rein in the national debt, look for other ways to do it.
Sure. Co-host here, I guess I'll go first. Typically, whenever this conversation comes up, people who are, more along the lines of being really worried about the debt, the constant conversation is, well, shouldn't we be more fiscally responsible, right? I think we had this conversation yesterday, didn't we, Sock? So about fiscal responsibility in America, and to which I don't know that anyone's honestly going to have that conversation with you and say yeah, I don't care about fiscal responsibility. It's a pretty obvious yes statement. But my issue always comes with, where does that conversation go after that? Because after you get to the point of oh yeah, we care about fiscal responsibility, well, then it's about two things. Either A, you're going to tax people more, or B, you're going to, cut spending, or maybe you do a combination of both. Speaker McCarthy came out and said that raising taxes was a non-starter for him. So he's immediately going no new taxes, just spending cuts. And the conversation on spending cuts never goes to the places where we're spending the most money. It's always going to places to where let's cut spending for people who need the most help. The people in our society who are the most vulnerable, who are the most abused, who are the most just in need of government assistance. That's the spending that Republicans in particular, they always want to cut. And I also want to read a tweet here from Senator John Fetterman about what he said on just on Twitter a couple days ago, where he said, I sure didn't come to Washington to take vital assistance away from working people. At the same time, big bank CEOs nearly crash the economy and get to jet off to Hawaii scot-free. I cannot in good conscience support a debt ceiling proposal that pushes people into poverty. We're already addressing SNAP in a bipartisan way in the Farm Bill, but with the default looming, jamming through harmful cuts to that program is reckless. It's time to stop playing games and guarantee the full faith and credit of the United States. And I'm in the same place that I think he's trying to echo right there. If we're going to address the debt ceiling, it shouldn't be in a way where we're trying to harm people who need the most assistance.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to take a very unpopular opinion here, but I'm actually okay with putting work requirements into SNAP benefits or Medicaid benefits or whatever low income benefits people qualify for. I think I'm okay putting limits there, because I think we need to use those programs as a way to push people to actually get back into working, right? Instead of just trying to skate by, not necessarily living off the system or being welfare queens or whatever you want to call them, right? I think there should be some metric or some policy to try to get them back into contributing to our tax base and our country, right, and our GDP. That being said, all right, I would much rather, going through this, debt ceiling proposal or whatever, I would love to see a lot more cuts towards the military budget, right? I don't necessarily want to see budget cuts from SNAP or Medicare or Medicaid. I don't want to see budget cuts from that, right? But I don't mind seeing the rules put in place. I would love to see more budgetary cuts from the military, right? It's insane the amount of money we spend on the military. Like, I don't understand why we can't even cut a little bit from that, other than military contractors lobbying. Like, that's basically the only reason. So just because it lines their pockets, and it's very unfortunate. If military budget cuts is included in this, then that's cool. But the way it sounds, it's not really included, and it's kind of unfortunate. But as far as the rules and stuff for the welfare items, and like, I'm okay with that.
I think I approach this question a little bit differently, which is I don't think that there is a serious conversation about debt reduction, or at least one that we can actually trust is happening. I feel like all of this is political gamesmanship, and it's because of the debt ceiling. If we actually defaulted on the debt ceiling, it would be catastrophic, like for the entire U.S. economy, probably for the global economy. So the idea of playing games with it is just patently absurd. I mean, and so that's like where we land on this. I mean, in the past, Speaker McCarthy and House Republicans voted to raise the debt ceiling without any spending cuts under Trump. I think it's because it's politically advantageous that they're now pushing for it. What I would like to see are actual cuts to military spending, because I think that you can do meaningful cuts to that and not harm the national security of the United States. But to hold the full faith and credit hostage for something like this, to me, is dishonest. You can do spending cuts while not also jeopardizing the debt ceiling. The two are actually mutually exclusive. And so I think that when it comes down to it, this is all just political games. They want to do something where they can take it back to their district and show, oh, I stood up for no taxes, no new taxes and fiscal conservatism, or I stood up for SNAP benefits, or for no cuts to SNAP and stuff like that. It's so that they can signal back to their districts that this is what I did, so they can keep getting more money to run for Congress again every 2 years. Realistically, like, Kevin McCarthy is not being real on this because he knows it has to go to the Senate. The Senate is, at least right now, a narrow Democratic majority. Even though Joe Manchin kind of, dances this little Thumbelina, what am I on Tuesday, I'm different on Wednesday, when it comes to partisan ideologies and what he will vote for and what he won't. But the fact of the matter is that I don't think that this is a serious discussion. And I don't think that you have to have cuts to essential benefits for people in order for the government to continue functioning like it has for however many years we've been running on a deficit. That being said, I just haven't seen a lot of evidence, at least presented to me, or at least that I've read through, that show that work requirements are extremely beneficial. I think there's some that are already in place. So I don't know how adding more is helpful. Because I think that there's a lot of people that are contributing, that are giving their money to a tax base while also still having to rely on government assistance. And I think that that's indicative of a larger problem, which is that the work that they're doing is not enough for them to get by. I think that is something that both parties should really be aligned on. And I've said this for a long time, that issues of class are nonpartisan issues that unite people is struggling paycheck to paycheck. And that's where we should be aligning on these things. To me, you don't solve the broader economic problems of the United States by cuts to the social safety net, or by work requirements, or even by simply cutting defense spending. I think it's way broader than that. I think that there is just such a chasm between people who are able to make it by and be well off, or even just live comfortably, and people who are struggling paycheck to paycheck day to day. And that's kind of where I land on that. And also, apologies, but I have to hop off. So I apologize that I'm not able to continue this. But I'm happy to answer any questions with response to what I just said before I go, because I don't want to leave on that note.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. Chuck, thank you for coming on the show today. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for inviting me. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk about this. It's been great. And I really appreciate Sock, you and John, meeting you both. It's been good conversation.
Yeah, good meeting you, man.
Thank you very much, Chuck.
Cool. I'll talk to y'all later.
I wanted to hop on one thing that Chuck said there about the impact of work requirements. So I've done a lot of research on these sort of things. And the Center for Economic Policy Research did a study analyzing 19 different economic studies on the impact of work requirements on SNAP benefits and other sorts of benefits towards employment. And it generally shows that they have zero to very little positive impact on employment. I mean, we're sitting in a country with less than 4% unemployment. I don't think that is a major thing we're trying to do. In fact, the Federal Reserve is trying to increase unemployment right now. So the fact that Congress is working to apparently get more people employed doesn't quite make sense as a coherent strategy for our economy. The larger issue here is, I think, a philosophical one of, should people need to work to eat and receive medical care? Because even if you think that, yes, they should, then how does that actually benefit us? Because then if they don't eat, then they can't work because they're dead. If they don't eat enough, then they have worse health effects, which if they don't have treatment for, then they don't get proactively treated and end up in the emergency room. And we end up paying more for it instead of just giving them some money for appropriate food up front. Instead of having a system where we have to means test and see if these people are actually working and paying people to do so, why don't we just give them the food they need? It seems to me to always be the more economically efficient, fiscally responsible thing to give people what they need instead of paying money to make them jump through hoops to make sure they deserve it. Because people need food, they need healthcare. Whether they're working or not, it's going to bite us in the butt at the end of the day if we don't give it to them.
It kind of reminds me of, was it like a month or so ago, we saw the state of North Dakota. They were deciding that they didn't want the state to be responsible for paying for the school lunches of children who were, I guess, like closer to poverty. And then at the same time, like a week later, they voted to increase their own, I guess, like meal reimbursement fund for the legislators in the state house of North Dakota. So it does seem very hypocritical when we're talking about these conversations, because I think if you were truly invested on making sure that people didn't need to, rely on federal assistance, then you would be making policies that would make housing cheaper, that would be making food cheaper, that these corporations wouldn't be able to price gouge us the way that they are able to, that we're actually able to make sure that these people are being paid more just all around the board. Then people wouldn't have to rely on things like federal assistance as much. But it falls on deaf ears for me, because I've been hearing these almost like these dog whistles attacking poor people for my entire life. Like, oh, these lazy people just relying on SNAP benefits, who are just relying on Medicaid, that they're just not contributing to the economy. It's like, I've known plenty of people who are on Medicaid. I've known people who have SNAP benefits. These are people who are just struggling to survive, like doing everything that they know how to. And I'm sure that somebody else would say, like, oh, I know somebody who gets a disability check and goes out and plays golf every day. It's just like, I mean, I'm not denying that some of those people exist, but most people who I know who are on government assistance, these are people who are like single parents, or who are just like working like a couple jobs and still not making that much money. Like, we all know that this, like, living in this world is incredibly difficult. And sometimes if you are in a position where you actually need to get on federal assistance, like, that is not a place you ever want to stay at. You're there for as long as you need to, and then hopefully like your situation gets better. But it's a lifeline for so many people. It's an absolute lifeline. And to be trying to cut that off is just, it's incredibly inhumane in my personal opinion.
Well, yeah, and like I'm not going to sit here and say like we need to cut off SNAP benefits for, low income individuals, right, that can't afford food, because that obviously that's inhumane and that's messed up. Like I'm not saying that we need to cut the funding. I'm saying that we need to find a way, like, and John, I think you made a good point earlier where it's like what the Republicans are pushing for here is not necessarily coinciding with the Fed policy that they're doing, right? And unfortunately, that these two agencies like aren't necessarily under the same umbrella, right? How the Fed's like kind of separate, so it's unfortunate, like they're not going to be able to work together, right, in this. And like I'm okay with Congress trying to figure out how to get more people employed. I think it's great that our unemployment is under 4% in a way. All right. It's obviously hurting us in some ways, but like I'm really glad that there's more and more people out there like working. I understand people are struggling and all that, but I don't necessarily want to cut the monetary benefits from it, because Desmond, opposite of you, how like most of the people that that have been on like SNAP benefits, and whatever, like use it for the right things. More people that I know are using it for the wrong things, and it's kind of like we're living in two different realities, right? And I believe that you're correct though, that more people probably do that, right? And mine is like the exception, not the rule, right? And that's good, that's what we want, but if we cut the money there, that's a problem. So if we cut it from the defense budget, so all in all, I'm agreeing with you guys that McCarthy's plan is stupid, right? But I do understand his points in trying to get work requirements and trying to get more people into work. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I appreciate from I don't often hear conservatives admit, yeah, no, we should cut the military more before we do this sort of thing. Like that's how I know that you're a conservative I can talk to. It's like there's a 900-pound gorilla who's eating all of our food, and we're like, well, we can't give food to the poor people. It's like, what about the 900-pound gorilla no one's talking about?
Oh, believe me, I'm conservative light though. Okay, I'm not like deep red. All right, I'm conservative light. But yeah, no, I don't know. I want to see people succeed. I don't like that the government's going to be held hostage here, right? Or people's lives are going to be held hostage, because I heard some metric that if we do default on our debt, the next day we have about 8 million more people on unemployment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be a globally cataclysmic thing if we were to default on the debt. And I also just want to make a quick amendment. Last week we talked about the debt ceiling, and I said, who cares about this subject? And then over the last week, while we've been sharing these videos with people, it was the most requested video was people wanting to hear us talk about the debt ceiling. So apparently everyone is very interested in the debt ceiling, so we can got a little egg on my face this week, but that's all right. I think we'll be probably talking about this, again, as the situation continues to unfold. I'm not detracting what I said last week, but maybe it's just me versus, like no one cares. Maybe it's just me. It doesn't care. But we're still going to talk about it anyway. Again, want to thank our guest Sock for coming on. Thank our guest Chuck for coming on. Do you have any final words for us today, John?
I wanted to wrap this up by saying that as the left, we should start fighting the fiscal responsibility fight on the Republicans' terms. I feel like the vast majority of America say they're the fiscally responsive party, when that's really not the case, because they, as McCarthy said, I refuse to increase taxes. Well, here's the thing: if you don't ever make more money, then how are you going to be fiscally responsible? Like if you talk to a financial planner, they'll tell you want to save in times that are good and spend in times that are bad. And the problem is that we continue to spend in times that are bad and never save when times that are good. And I completely criticize people on the left who are like, we can just keep doing this forever, keep spending money. We can't if we never raise taxes, because if we just keep spending money and keep spending money and keep spending money, it will have bad economic consequences. And we need to fight that fight on the level of fiscal responsibility instead of punting the ball to their team whenever it comes up. But that's what I wanted to end on.
You know, I think the last thing I wanted to say was I heard someone have a really great take on this today. Is like, maybe we just need to go a little, you know, into the culture war ourselves on the left and just say like, well, hey, I think we need to tax George Soros. And then I think it'd probably get everyone on the right to be involved in it.